The sun beats down on a dusty training ground somewhere in Italy, centuries before Christ. Young men stumble under the crushing weight of their shields, their bodies slick with sweat, their lungs burning. Wooden swords, far heavier than steel, slam against shields with bone-rattling force. The smell of iron dust and leather mixes with the sour stench of exhaustion. A voice thunders above the chaos. The centurion's cane lashes across the back of a recruit who dares to slow his pace. There is no pity here, no sympathy, only a brutal truth. Many of these young men will not survive long enough to see real battle. The training itself will claim them. For Rome, this was not cruelty. This was necessity. For every legionary who carried the eagle standard into battle, there had been a dozen boys, broken, beaten, or buried in the fields of training. And so the question lingers, how did Rome build an army so unstoppable that its enemies trembled at the mere sight of its standards? The answer begins not on the battlefield, but in the killing fields of its own camps, where 1 in 5 recruits would die before ever tasting war. Historical background. Rome's military machine was never an accident. It was engineered, as precise and unrelenting as the roads they built across their empire. At its heart was a simple belief. Victory belonged not to the strongest, but to the most disciplined. The earliest Roman armies were militias of citizen farmers. In the days of the Republic, men were called from their fields to fight and then sent back to the plow. But as Rome expanded, it could no longer rely on part-time soldiers. It needed professionals, men forged into weapons of flesh and bone. Thus was born the system of training camps, the crucibles of discipline. Recruits, often boys barely into their teens, were brought into these camps and subjected to trials that bordered on the inhuman. Polybius, the Greek historian who studied Rome, described their regimen with awe and horror. Every detail was designed to break the weak and harden the survivors. Wooden swords, twice as heavy as real ones, forced recruits to build muscle. Shields made of wicker but weighted with lead drilled endurance into their arms. Daily marches stretched 20 miles, done in full armor under blazing sun. Those who stumbled were whipped. Those who collapsed were carried out on stretchers, never to return. Rome believed war was not won by courage alone, but by men who had been remade, men whose very skin bore the coluses of discipline. And that transformation demanded sacrifice.
The transformation of training into a deadly science began in the 3rd and 2nd centuries BCE as Rome faced enemies unlike any it had ever known. The Samnites in the mountains of Italy, the Carthaginians across the sea, and later the Greeks, all required Rome to sharpen its legions beyond the level of any militia. The Campus Martius, the field of Mars in every Roman settlement, became a place where boys entered and soldiers emerged or died trying. Here the methods grew ever harsher. Centurions enforced constant drilling. Soldiers learned to march in perfect formation for hours until their feet blistered. They practiced constructing camps in record time, digging ditches and erecting palisades until their hands bled. They trained with javelins so heavy they bent arms backwards. But the most infamous element was the use of punishment as a tool of discipline. A recruit who faltered could be beaten, flogged, or even executed as an example. Decimation, the killing of 1 in 10 men in a disgraced unit, reminded every soldier that failure was deadlier than the enemy. the system worked. By the time Rome faced Hannibal in the Punic Wars, its legions were not just armies, they were machines of iron discipline. Men drilled to fight as one weapon. But the price was staggering. Ancient sources suggest that as many as 20% of recruits never survived their first year of training, succumbing to exhaustion, injury, disease, or punishment. By the height of the Roman Republic and into the Empire, the training system had become legendary. Other nations marveled and feared the endurance of the Roman soldier. Imagine a dawn scene on the edge of Gaul. Legionaries rise from their tents and immediately march 20 miles with full packs, shields, and armor. They arrive, drenched in sweat, only to be ordered to build a fortified camp. Ditches, stakes, walls before nightfall. Every day repeated this cycle until the routine became second nature. Battle itself was merely the final test. By the time a legion met its enemy, its men had been hardened by trials so punishing that war seemed almost easier. Roman generals understood this. Julius Caesar, writing in his commentaries, often praised not the courage of his men, but their training. He knew that their ability to march, dig, and fight without rest was the secret to his lightning campaigns. The Corvus may have won Rome the sea, but training won it the world. A legionary was more than a soldier. He was Rome itself, discipline incarnate.
But nothing lasts forever. As the centuries passed, the harsh edge of Roman training dulled. By the late Empire, the need for recruits grew desperate. Rome expanded its borders so far that its manpower could no longer keep pace. New recruits were drawn from conquered peoples, mercenaries, and even barbarians. To keep numbers high, the brutal training that once killed 1 in 5 was softened. The results were clear. Armies lost their iron discipline. Cohorts fled in the face of enemies they once would have crushed. Generals complained of soldiers too weak, too undisciplined, too un-Roman. By the time Rome faced the invasions of the Goths and Huns, its legions were Roman in name only. The nightmare training that had once forged invincible armies had faded into memory, and with it, much of Rome's might. Yet, even in decline, Rome's training left a legacy that echoes into modern times. Modern boot camps, from West Point to the British SAS to Japan's self-defense forces, still borrow from Roman methods. Endless drills, long marches, weapons heavier than necessary, the breaking down of individuality to forge unity. These are all Roman inventions. The idea that soldiers must be remade through suffering is Roman at its core. The difference is that today's systems are carefully measured, designed to push men to the edge, but not beyond. Rome had no such mercy. To them, death in training was not tragedy, it was selection. Even in pop culture, we see Rome's shadow. Films of soldiers enduring punishing drills, books describing elite forces pushed past the brink, all carry echoes of the Campus Martius. The Roman method lives on, both as inspiration and as a warning. So we must ask, was this system genius or madness? Did Rome win because it demanded the impossible of its recruits? Or did it build greatness on the broken bodies of boys who never had a chance?
Conclusion. The nightmare training of Rome was not glamorous. It was brutal, merciless, and deadly. 1 in 5 recruits never lived to see the battlefield. Yet, it created soldiers who could march across continents, build empires, and change the course of history. Rome's strength was not born from glory, but from pain. And perhaps that is why its legions became the iron fist of the ancient world. The next time you see a soldier drilling under the sun, remember, they are following in the footsteps of men who carried shields heavier than their own bodies, who marched until their feet bled, who trained in conditions so deadly that survival itself was a victory. That is the legacy of Rome's nightmare training. If you enjoyed this story of forgotten history, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because there are countless more tales waiting to be told of the ideas, the weapons, and the people that built and broke empires. History is not just about battles fought, but about the trials endured before the fighting even began. And for Rome, the greatest trial of all was surviving the training ground.